Dear Kevin, well, son, it was one incredible journey. I kept you close to me all the way. Your ashes were there in my backpack to give me strength and courage every time I spoke. We walked together through barren deserts, withering winds, snow and rainstorms, up over high mountain passes and down through beautiful sun-drenched mountain valleys for the final time. I played back so many fond memories of you as I walked. Memories of the day you were born, your many baseball and soccer games, and trips to the county fair with your pigs. At the viewing before the memorial, I was there, but I didn't go in. I stood outside with friends and family, hugging, laughing, and crying. I chose not to see you lying in a casket, but to remember you as you lived, your love for a good laugh, a good friend, and for life. You taught me many things in life about being a father and what it means to love a child. Your death has taught me how deep that love goes and that life holds no guarantees. You taught me that God has a plan for each of us and that sometimes someone must die so that others might live. You are no longer with us physically, but you'll always be there in our hearts. Love, the Dad.
Welcome back, everybody, to this episode of the Pay It Forward podcast. I am one of your hosts, Austin Seward, along with my co-host, Keegan Walls. And today we have the pleasure of sitting down with Barry Adkins. Barry is here in person, in studio, all the way from Arizona, and has a very powerful story of losing his 18-year-old son to alcohol poisoning. So we are excited to have Barry here with us to share that story of his son's tragic death and the lessons that he's learned from that and the impact that he's been able to have from that. So Barry's actually walked 1,400 miles with his son Kevin's ashes from Arizona all the way to Kalispell, Montana. So we want to hear more about that story as well. So thanks for being here with us, Barry.
Well, thank you for having me on.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Barry, why don't you just kind of take some time and tell us the story of your son and how all that happened?
Yeah, so he was not a very good student, and he was actually flunking his English class in March of his senior year in high school, and he needs it for graduation, right? And everybody knows what he would say when I would talk to him about it. Yeah, Dad, don't worry about it. But I wouldn't take his word for it. So I would actually call the school and ask to talk to the teacher and ask all those things like, was he there today? Did he turn in his assignments? Because most of his problem was he would just never turn in an assignment. It was the strangest thing. The teacher said, well, he never turned it in. But the teacher knew what to do to motivate him. So she would go back into class and report back to him in front of all of his buddies that his daddy called to check on him. And then I get the call, right? Would you knock it off? Stop calling my teachers. I'm like, look, dude, this is the only class you're even close on. Just take care of it, man. You know what to do. We all know what to do. But he did get his grades up, and he did graduate. And after his high school graduation ceremony, he gave me a hug and whispered, thanks for not giving up on me, Dad. So he graduates from high school. He got a job right out of high school working for an electrician, making good money. He met my financial requirements, so I agreed to co-sign a loan because he wanted to buy a new truck. And I made him give me 3 months worth of insurance payments and car payments, right? Because I didn't want to be on the hook for it. It's his deal, not mine. I don't want to pay for this thing. And I'm hoping they'll find a truck from a private party, go down to the credit union and sign papers and be out of there in like 5 minutes. And he found one at a dealership. And we all know what happens when you go into a dealership. They're going to sell you a bunch of stuff you don't want or need. So I got to go down and sign papers. The first thing that financial guy said to me was, how about some life insurance? I'm like, look, I'm not here for life insurance. I don't need any life insurance. My wife will do just fine if something happens to me. And he said, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about your son. I'm that guy. I'm that guy who rather indignantly told him that 18-year-old boys don't need life insurance because they don't die. But I was wrong. They do die. He wouldn't live long enough to make a single payment on that truck. So he's graduated from high school. He's got a new truck. He's 18 years old. What's the next thing he wants to do is move out. I mean, I made him do all those terrible things like come in and wake me up when you get home, all that kind of stuff. But I remember him coming into our living room one day, and we have this brown chair that sits in front of a big picture window, looks out over our backyard. He sat down in that brown chair and started talking about how he couldn't believe his life was finally beginning, and he wanted to move out. And I did my best to discourage him because, honestly, we never really had any problems with him. His high school principal didn't even know who he was, and I considered that a good thing. But I didn't have any luck talking him out of it. So a couple weeks later, his buddy Craig came over, and they started the process of moving him out. Hey, he's 18 years old, right? He threw a bed, a TV, and a dresser in the back of his truck. That was his definition of moving out. But he went back into his bedroom, and his clothing system was a pile of dirty clothes on the floor right next to a pile of clean clothes. He never folded any clothes. He grabbed a pair of the clean jeans, threw them in the dryer to de-wrinkle, came in the living room and told me something I've never forgotten. He said he wasn't going to take his toothbrush with him. He'd be back tomorrow morning and grab it. He put on his jeans. I walked out front with him like I normally do, gave him a hug, told him that I loved him and be careful. Watched him drive away. It was the last time I saw him alive. That night, his friends decided to throw a little housewarming party for him. Started with a keg of beer, moved on to shots. He left a voicemail for his sister that night talking about how they were drinking, having a good time. You could hear people laughing in the background. Wouldn't sound like any big deal, except it was. Somebody died that night. That somebody was my son, Kevin. He passed out a short time after he left that voicemail. The people at the party laid him in his bed on his side in case he vomited, but the party was still going on. They actually went in and shaved his head and his legs while he was passed out because he's just passed out. But his buddy Craig was worried about him, kept going back in to check on him. Around 4 a.m., calls started coming into 911. First calls were difficulty breathing. Next calls were not breathing. My son died alone in a hospital while I slept peacefully in my bed. The next morning was Sunday morning. My wife and I are sitting around drinking coffee, talking about what we're going to do that day or not do. At about 8:30 in the morning, the doorbell rings. And we're looking at each other because we weren't expecting company. And I open the door, and I see 2 police officers and somebody in plain clothes standing at my front door. Should have been a big red flag, right? It should have been. I'm that guy. It didn't even occur to me that something bad had happened. I actually joked with them as they came in, thinking this had to have something to do with a dog or a parked car. But they didn't laugh at any of my jokes. One of the officers and the person in plain clothes stayed by the front door. The other officer walked in and stood in front of that brown chair that Kevin had sat in 2 weeks before and talked about how his life was finally beginning. He said there'd been an accident. Your son is dead. We asked who, because we have a number of children. He said it was Kevin, and they handed me his driver's license. There's something pretty final about it when a police officer hands you your child's driver's license, because until that exact moment in time, you're holding out hope. This is all a big mistake. You have misspelled the last name. Get out of here. You need to be 3 streets over or next door, right? Any place but my place. But when they hand you your child's driver's license, you know he's gone and he's never coming back. One of us finally asked what had happened. The officer said the probable cause of death was alcohol poisoning. We found out later that that is indeed what happened. His blood alcohol content was 0.36%. Very drunk. It's the only statistic I mention, and the only reason I mention it is if you're ever in that situation, think about Kevin's buddy Craig. It's a night he'll never forget. So a couple days after Kevin passed away, I was laying in bed. And the best way I can describe it is I felt like someone had come into the room. Felt like something had happened that I didn't see. Then there was a light I'd never seen before and haven't seen since. The message was really very simple. Kevin did not suffer, and something very good would come from this. A few days after that, I spoke at his memorial. And I'm going to read an excerpt of what I said. Many of you have asked, what can I do to help? Well, here's what you can do. Each of you can make something very good come from this. I don't know if it's one something very good or 1,000 something very goods. It might be a tiny something very good or a huge something very good. But I am convinced something very good can come from this. I don't know who, what, when, where, how, but I know that it will. I ask each of you to find that something very good and make it happen. That is what you can do for us and for Kevin. Like I said, dark days, man. We decided to have Kevin cremated. And I got a call a few days later to come and pick up his remains. So I go down to the funeral home. I walk into the funeral home, and there are nice pictures on the wall, and they're playing music in the background. They take me into an office, sit me down in a big, comfortable chair, the big desk sitting in front of me. Funeral director walks in, sets an urn down in front of me. An urn that holds all the remains of the kid that I burped, changed his diapers, coached baseball, basketball, soccer, football. I taught him to shoot a gun and swing a golf club. All that remains of him was sitting in an urn in front of me. There's one thing I knew at that point, and that was that I didn't want to be a victim. Because the world doesn't need any more victims. We've got plenty already. The world needs people who take something bad and they make something very good come from it. And I thought about what I would hope somebody else would do if it happened to their kid. And for me, the answer was pretty easy. It was get out and tell the story. Not for the money. Because here's a dirty little secret for you that lawyers don't want you to know. There is no money in the world that'll fix the hurt. It does not exist. The only thing that helps is to try to make something good come from such a senseless tragedy. So now we got to figure out what are we going to do with his ashes, right? I actually grew up in Kalispell, Montana, and Kevin had been there a number of times and always talked about wanting to buy a ranch there someday. So we decided to take his ashes to Montana. I suppose the normal thing to do is put him in your car and drive there, right? It's 1,400 miles. But I decided to put him in my backpack and walk there and tell the story. Because I promise you, you don't want to go through this. So I have 3 things I really want you to take away from this. And the first one is about decision making. The 2 most important decisions that you or your children will ever make, apart from following Jesus, are about drugs and alcohol. It isn't even close. We all know stories, right? You need to educate yourselves about the dangers of drug and alcohol abuse as if your life and the lives of your children depend upon it. Because it does. It just does. And the second thing is about adversity. Bad stuff happens to everybody. The way you respond to adversity is going to define your life. Notice I didn't say might. It will. And third, and perhaps most important, is about this thing called forgiveness. It was easy for me to forgive the guys at the party because this was Kevin's choice, right? This was his decision. And it was easy for me to forgive my kid. That's what parents do. But there's one person that was really hard to forgive. And that was me. It took 1,400 miles and 5 pairs of shoes, but I have found a way to forgive myself. I heard a pastor describe it best once. He said that anger and vengeance lead to one thing: destruction. Forgiveness leads to healing. And sometimes the most important person you need to forgive is yourself. We all make mistakes. It's how you handle it that matters. Pain is fertile ground for radical change. Don't waste that pain, man. Don't waste that pain. So I actually wrote a book about this. It's called Kevin's Last Walk, A Father's Final Journey with His Son. It is available on Amazon. I'm going to finish up by reading a little excerpt from this I call A Letter to Kevin. Dear Kevin, well, son, it was one incredible journey. I kept you close to me all the way. Your ashes were there in my backpack to give me strength and courage every time I spoke. We walked together through barren deserts, withering winds, snow, and rainstorms, up over high mountain passes and down through beautiful sun-drenched mountain valleys for the final time. I played back so many fond memories of you as I walked. Memories of the day you were born, your many baseball and soccer games, and trips to the county fair with your pigs. At the viewing before the memorial, I was there, but I didn't go in. I stood outside with friends and family, hugging, laughing, and crying. I chose not to see you lying in a casket, but to remember you as you lived, your love for a good laugh, a good friend, for life. You taught me many things in life about being a father and what it means to love a child. Your death has taught me how deep that love goes and that life holds no guarantees. You taught me that God has a plan for each of us and that sometimes someone must die so that others might live. You are no longer with us physically, but you'll always be there in our hearts. Love, the Dad. So here's the thing. This is Kevin's story. My question is, what do you want your story to be?
Thank you for sharing all that, Barry. Powerful story. Can you walk us through, I mean, you talked a lot about forgiveness, and the hardest part was forgiving yourself. What does that look like?
It's about letting go and knowing that there's nothing I can do about the past. I can only change the future. I can't do anything about what's happened in the past. I need to let go and focus on the future.
Practically speaking, like how, when it's involving like your son or family. So I'm just thinking like for me, me personally, right? I got two little boys, brand new little boys. I'm just thinking 18, like how, you know what I'm saying? Like that process of letting go, like how do you talk about that? And then the spiritual, emotional, like turmoil, just cause like I can't compute, nor do I, you know what I mean? Or nor
Just
do I
like
wanna,
me, right?
Nor do I even want to try to compute. I don't, right? So when that happens, how do you actually let go of that? And then, I mean, how do you continue to go forward every day?
It's a God thing. I can't explain what happened to me. I have no intention of doing that. I don't know why God chose me for this. I'm not the right guy, right? I'm not somebody that wanted to go out and I never did any public speaking. I never did any of that stuff. But I also learned that I got to hand it all over to him. It's not about me. It's about what he has planned. And that's really the best way to describe it, is I had to just let him have it all. And that's letting go and letting God do what he's going to do. It's not easy to do. We're men, right? We fix everything. We do all of that stuff. But the reality is we're not in charge. He is. And I'm living proof that if you want to hear God laugh, tell him your plans. This was not part of the agenda. It was a middle-class world. Doing middle-class stuff, going to church on Sunday, all of that good stuff. He had other plans. And here I am.
Did you ever have to, I mean, was your faith or belief tested in that time? And did you ever have to forgive God?
No, but I use some colorful language when I talk to him.
Yeah.
Because I was pissed.
Yeah.
Why did you do that? Back up time. Take me, man.
Yeah.
Those were probably my exact words. At the time I was 48 years old, I'd lived a good life, right? Middle-class life, wife and kids, all that good stuff, house. Back up time. Let him live. And I say that I don't think I'm you would do the same thing.
Yeah.
Right? 100%. You would do the same thing. Take me, let him live.
I think that's a hard part that believers struggle with, and maybe non-believers too. Look at like, why God? Why did you do this? Why did you take somebody way too young in any situation, right? But just having an understanding of the good that's coming from this. I'm not saying that this was planned by God whatsoever. There is another spiritual force. There is good and evil in the world, but
There is.
But using this and not choosing to be a victim of the situation, and this is the reality, the unfortunate reality, and not choosing to be a victim of that, and helping others and sharing his story through doing that. So tell us more about this 1,400-mile journey on foot. Where did the idea of that even come from?
Yeah, so Kevin's favorite movie was Lonesome Dove, Tommy Lee Jones and Robert Duvall. Have you seen it?
No.
Okay, you better put it on your list. Have you?
No.
Okay, you guys need to see it. It'll be in that movie. I'll just leave it at that. The idea for it came in the movie.
Okay.
In the movie, he did something. Tommy Lee Jones did something on horseback. I didn't do it on horseback. I probably wouldn't be sitting here today if I tried it on horseback. And originally, I was going to walk the Continental Divide. When the idea came to me, it was, I'm going to walk the Continental Divide all the way. But I realized that there was something more I needed to do. I needed to be able to tell the story. And the only way to do that is to walk on the roads. But yeah, that's where the idea came from. I told her, and we stood in the kitchen and cried for a while. Because as she's pointed out, as my wife has pointed out, she doesn't remember this being in the marital vows about supporting a 1,400-mile walk, but she's the one that made most of that stuff happen, all the details.
Were you like physically active, like training for any of this stuff beforehand, or this just happened?
I've ran marathons.
Okay.
I've ran 6, 7, 8.
Okay. So you're a runner.
I ran a 350 marathon.
Okay.
But when you train for marathons and stuff, you have your days off, right? Yeah. And I tried to prepare for it by going out on the weekends, and I'd walk 20 miles a couple days in a row, but it doesn't prepare your body for, I ended up walking about 13 or 14 miles a day, every day. And there's no way to really prepare for that because it's not the first day or the second day that gets you. It's weeks into it when you haven't had a break. And I had plantar fasciitis, a bad knee, a blister about the size of a quarter on my foot. But I've realized that once you decide to do something, you're not going to let anything get in the way. Did it hurt at times? Oh, yeah, it hurt. I mean, in fact, on this cover, that picture, I was just telling someone this the other day, that that picture, I've got my head down because I had just started walking. And you guys have plantar fasciitis? Either one of you have it? You're lucky. Because the first few steps are just, once you get going, it's fine. But those first few steps are like somebody's got a knife in your foot. So.
How long did that take? The whole journey?
The whole journey took about 4 months. We had to plan all this out, notmykid.org, in Phoenix, scheduled everything. But I had to tell them when I'm going to be in which cities. And all of this was in 2007, which predates the cool tools that we have today. So knowing when to stop so we could be at a school, we had to plan all that out. Very little communication, just show up and hope everything's good. But I probably stopped 35 or 40 times. We did several where somebody would just stop by the road and say, hey, can you come to my school tomorrow?
Really?
Oh, yeah.
What were some of the coolest stories from that journey or interactions with people or the fruit of the impact that you've had?
You know, you realize, first of all, there's a lot of wonderful people out there. there's a couple that stick out for me. The first one was just north of Flagstaff, between Flagstaff, Arizona and Page, Arizona. I had just spoken at Flagstaff High School. I saw a car go by, brake lights go on. I think, oh, cool. I'm going to take a little break here and talk to this guy. He was actually a Flagstaff police officer. He got out and he said, "Are you the guy that just spoke at Flagstaff High School?" I said, "I am." And he said, "I want to thank you for that, because for the first time, my son came home and told me about school and what happened." The other one that I remember distinctly, there was a number of them. People brought brownies and milk. I had people bring me brownies and milk, which I didn't want to eat, but I had to. There was a guy right by Lake Powell. He pulled into the parking lot driving like a 1972 Datsun. Datsun was, what is it now? It's Nissan. Old guy, he gets out and talks to me for a while, and we get done, and he hands me $5 and says, "Get yourself something to eat when you come into town." And part of me wanted to not take that $5. He couldn't afford it, right? But it's been pointed out to me, you can't deny people that joy. If somebody wants to help you with it, you got to let them do it.
Can you walk us through what did the end of that journey feel like when you got to your destination, and you did let go of your son's ashes? Walk us through what that was like.
It was a physical relief, obviously, but now I've got to leave him there. And now I'm left with wondering what's next, right? Because if I could have had 5 more seconds, I would have asked, "What do you want me to do?" Right? What does this term mean? I don't know what that term means. And I think that's specifically the point, is that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to make something very good come from this.
Was that like a private moment that you had, or was there people around that, were celebrating the end of the journey with you?
Yeah, we, I don't know, there was probably 300, 400, 500 people walked the last 3 miles with us. Then I told the story there. Then we had a private event where we left his ashes, and then we went to a lake by there and had a picnic. And that's the way we closed it out. I didn't want I'm not wanting to sit around and mope about stuff. We had all the family there.
Yeah.
People came in from Alaska, from Pennsylvania, all around the country.
Very cool.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it was.
Very cool.
So after it's done, and then you turn around and realize you have to walk 1,400 miles. Not just kidding.
You know what? That's a very common question. That's a very common question. The answer to that is no. I did not sleep under bridges. I slept in hotels every night, and one of the requirements for a hotel was it had a tub in it, so I could soak in it.
Hot tub or cold?
No, just a tub that I could get in with some hot water. Yeah. But that's a very common. Kids almost always ask that question. Did you walk back? No, this has cured me of big projects.
Can you talk about over that 1,400 miles for you emotionally, spiritually, what that was like to do that? Have you ever thought back, like if you didn't have that moment, or if you didn't tell the story in that way, do you think things would have been different? Was it just unbelievably helpful to actually walk the 1,400 miles in your own personal like healing journey? I mean, I know it's also like 2007, so we don't have all the gadgets, but like you are literally disconnected. It's just you and I mean, apparently 300 to 500 people.
At the end, yeah, at the rest of it. But, you know, I did not wear headphones because I wanted to be able to hear, because I'm walking 2-lane roads, right? But I think it's important, especially in today's world, to unplug and do something quiet, because the story there is my uncle, I was in the Bob Marshall Wilderness with him, and we're up on top of this hill. We're out in the middle of nowhere, right? It's miles from anything, and it's just so quiet. And I turned to him and I said, "Man, it's so quiet up here." And his response was, "Yeah, and it has a lot to say." You need that quiet time.
Yeah. Bob Marshall's a beautiful area.
You been there?
Yeah.
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 It's been bear hunting in that area.
Yeah. Yeah. We always had to worry about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about when the 1,400 miles is up and it's over and you've told the story and you've done all the things, do you have a moment of thinking like, well, like now what, right? Again, it feels like that letting go of we're going to leave the ashes up here, this kind of whole thing, this 4 months, but a little bit of like that. Now it's time to go back to life, right? Which I would imagine what's the craziest part. It's like healing never ends, the journey never ends, but then at some point there's always that you're met with the time to get back to it.
There was, and basically, I knew that it probably was not the end, but it was kind of interesting because I kept a blog. We didn't really have the ability to do, so I kept a blog that people read. And when I got done with that, I called up a good buddy of mine and I said, "Hey, I'm going to print this out and put it in a 3-ring binder. Do you want a copy of it?" And he said, "No." I said, "Why not?" And he said, "Well, you're writing a book about this." And I said, "No, I'm not." But here I am, because actually writing a book was harder than walking to Montana.
Really?
Well, yeah, because when you walk, I know what my job is every day, right? I'm going to walk 13 or 14 miles and I'm done. Writing a book uses a different part of your brain. And it took a few years for me to even think about doing it, because I just didn't want to tackle it, because I knew it was going to be a project. But I read a lot of, 90 Minutes in Heaven. There's a lot of books you can read out there. All of those are good books. But Stephen King wrote a book on writing. And in that book, this was the best piece of advice I got. He said, you use two different parts of your brain. You use a creative part and then you use a logical part. And when you're using a creative part, he said he would go in his room, close the door, and he'd just start typing. And don't think about where it's going to go or if it's ever going to use. Just follow that stream of consciousness. Then later, figure out, am I going to use it or not? But you have to follow that and then use parts of it. And I thought it was great advice, because there's a lot of it that you just have to just get those random thoughts down on paper.
What's been some of the impact that has come from your book and giving speaking engagements?
I'm still doing it. I think the story rings true. A little more of the background here. So I always talk about stories, right? This is Kevin's story. I had a guy, it was a couple of years after I got back. I was at a function of some kind, and he asked me if I was still doing that speaking. And I said, yeah, I still speak at schools. And he goes, you shouldn't be doing that. You're too old to do that. Which kind of pissed me off. Right? But I got to thinking about it later. I should probably address that up front. And I've had a number of people tell me that's the most important thing you said was, I'm not here to tell you how to live your life, man. I'm just here to tell you a story. But yeah, I was pretty offended when he said that. I'm like, really? Yeah. Too old to do this?
I think it's one thing, it's the difference between telling somebody to do something and motivating them to want to do it themselves, right?
Yes.
You could get up and say, you need to do these things and you should not drink and you should not do these things, but how do you share the story to motivate them to not want to do that for themselves?
Yeah.
And that can be applied to anything. But what would you tell, say, a parent or somebody that knows that their kid is drinking and partying and doing these things? Like, what would you say to that person?
That's a tricky topic.
Because we're in Wisconsin. Drinking is the number one sport.
I understand.
It feels like it's so
too. Yeah. Every state says that. They do. They do.
But it's such a, you start talking about hard drugs and stuff, and it's like, we don't do that, but drinking, it's so normal. It's so normalized in everyday function, Sunday fun days, and any occasion you're drinking at, right? It's just a normal thing. So, but there can be dire consequences of it. So what do you say to those people?
Well, there's a couple of places we can go with this. The first one is the drinking age is 21. It's 21 for a reason. You can debate that. What I would say to students, and I say this to them, wait until you're 21. I promise you, you will not regret it. But if you start younger, the younger you start, the more likely it is to become a problem.
Mm-hmm.
On the topic of how do you have conversations with your kids about drugs and alcohol, how do you do that? My example is have a conversation with your spouse with the kids in the room. You can Google, you can get topics, tomorrow on alcohol poisoning or whatever. Just start talking about with them in the room, because kids don't really want to be talked to. Nobody wants to be talked to, but they're listening. I promise you. And I tell the kids the same thing. If you're not comfortable bringing it up, let your mom and dad hear you say something on the phone. Right? It'll at least start the conversation, because it's an awkward thing to do.
Yeah. And I think going back to what I said, it's how do you motivate them to want to not do that for themselves? Like for me, my dad was an alcoholic, and growing up, I told myself I am not drinking until I'm 21. And I'm not, there's friends in high school that were going to parties and doing that stuff, but I knew that the chances of me getting hooked on alcohol are much higher if I start drinking when I'm 16, 17, 18 years old versus waiting until college. So that motivated me, seeing him make a change. That motivated me to not want to do that. Maybe he told that to me when I was younger, but it was really my own motivation to not want to do that through his story. So I think sharing stories like this and coming from someone like you is motivating to people to not want to do that for themselves.
Yeah, wait until you're 21, because you don't understand how much your brain is going to develop in the next few years, and you're going to be able to see things clearer, because critical thinking when you're 15 years old, it's been a while for me, but 15 years old, there's no critical thinking going on. There's just what's next.
Yeah. Is there an age where it hits? Because I've been kind of waiting.
Keegan's got the jokes today.
My wife can attest. I'm just wondering, is the brain fully developed for men at 35? So I'm 31, and if I hear it's 25, and I go, well, then I'm toast.
Well, men's brains develop slower than women's. And the reality is, I'm 66, and I think my brain's still developing, right? Because you don't think about that stuff. You're just a guy, and you're doing stuff, and stuff. It's a bad plan.
Well, no, I mean that's absolutely the case with young people. That's also, they can't not live in a world and a viewpoint of instant gratification. They're just not developed enough. Everything is right now, and this is going to be more fun. And so, it's just difficult to get them to see the long game when they almost most of the time physically can't. It's like, if you would just trust me, but I know you're not going to trust me. This is a bummer situation for us both, because they can't see past tomorrow.
They can't see past the next party, right? And the other thing about that is that a lot of bad decisions are made under the influence of something. Getting behind the wheel of a car, or let's try climbing up that thing, or whatever it is. That alcohol's talking to you. That 12-pack is talking. That ain't your brain talking. That's that 12-pack talking.
Barry, what do you say to somebody who's afraid to share their story? They have a story that's not yours, but they've experienced some tragedy in their life, and they just don't want to talk about it, or they don't want to share that story with others.
It takes a little bit of guts to do it. But the other thing is that the way I've looked at it is, it's a tragedy, but what's the worst can happen by sharing the story? It's not going to be any worse than what just happened. Other people need to learn from stories. And there's lots of stories out there like Kevin's story, right? They're out there. Everybody you talk to has a story. You have a story about your dad, right? Everybody's got a story. You need to tell those stories.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's critical to tell the story. But when you tell the story to someone, this is something that I was coached on, is take me to that moment. I want to be sitting in a room when you get that knock on the door. I want to be walking into the funeral home with you. Because those are the moments that change minds, right? When you realize, because sometimes recovering addicts will go out and start telling their story, but it's almost like they're bragging about it, right? But you're not telling about the darker things that happened, right? You're not telling them that moment when you realized, I had stories I had a lady tell me about a story where she was almost murdered. She was in a drug house, and she got out of it by faking like she had an epileptic seizure. But there was a guy there to kill her because they thought she had squealed on him. And I said, if you tell that story, you have to tell that part, because that's the part that make people understand how real this is.
Well, that's our hope with this podcast, is being able to share stories with others and use stories like yourself and from others to be able to inspire our audience to take action or encourage them or motivate them in whatever they're dealing with right now. So,
staying on that same vein, what would you share to maybe the parent or the family member? So not the person trying to share their own story, but what would you tell somebody who's in a similar position as you? Like maybe they just lost somebody. They lost a loved one, a mom, a dad, a brother, somebody, whether tragically, like what would you tell them from your own experience? Like if I just can't continue to go on. Like what's the first step to healing? What am I, like I'm just left here with nothing. How do I start to move forward?
Yeah, so we're kind of talking about grief here. Grief, right? So for a long time, after Kevin passed away, I wanted to feel the way I did the day before he died. But that's not possible. The old you dies with the loved one that died. There's a new you there that can be a better you. Sometimes it doesn't work out that way, but there can be a better you that can make something good come from it. And that's really the most, I keep harping on that, but that's the most you can hope for. You'll see it, people will start foundations and they do that stuff. I think it's important to do that because it's part of the grief process, right? They need to be able to let go of that because that old you is gone. And it sounds harsh. I never really went to any grief counseling or anything, to be honest, because it felt like we were reliving the same thing every time. I listened to a little bit of it, and I thought, I don't really want to relive it. I want to tell a story, right? But the old you is gone. There's a new you there. What you do with it is entirely up to you.
So for you, it sounds like obviously God was important in helping in the healing process. And as a believer and a Christian, I mean, I don't know how anybody gets over anything without God. So for you, what were some of the biggest lessons you learned, like just things that God was teaching you, but also in a similar way, what were some of the big character traits that God was meeting you with? Does that mean like God's meeting you and showing up in a real way to help with the healing? Like what were some of the biggest lessons you learned from God and some of the ways of who he is, how he showed up in your life during that time?
We all know who he is, right? And we know it up here. But this is where he wants to live. And once he is there, you look at the world through a different set of glasses. There's no two ways about it. You just don't. You know he's got a plan. You don't know what that plan is, but he got a plan for you. And for me, it's listening for that still small voice. Because it might not be a whack on the head like I got, but it might be that little thing where you're wondering, maybe I should do that. And the example I give there, I actually wrote about this in the book. I remember talking to a guy about doing this. I talked to a lot of people. Family members, I had family members try to talk me out of doing this because they were afraid I was going to fail. I get it, right? But I talked to a guy, and I'll never forget what he said. He said, how do you think you'll feel about it in 10 years if you don't do it? And for me, that was where I thought, yeah, because life is full of regrets, right? How do you think you feel about it if you don't do it?
Well, Barry, man, appreciate you sharing all this powerful story. And we usually like to end, if there's kind of one thing you want to leave our audience with, what would that be?
That would be, help me out. I'm a one-man band. Reach out if you've got contacts at schools. If you can connect me, I'll come and tell the story. We'll find a way to make it happen.
And where can people find more about you?
The website is kevinslastwalk.com. On Facebook, it's Kevin's Last Walk. Either one of those, or just type in my name, Barry Adkins. I've done enough podcasts that it shows up at the top now.
Awesome.
So, but yeah, either one of those ways, reach out, connect me. We'll make it happen.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. And
thanks, Barry.
Yeah, we appreciate you sharing the story and us getting to hear it firsthand. So, thank you for that.
Thank you, everyone, for watching this episode of the Pay It Forward podcast. And like we always say, we hope that you can find a way this week to pay it forward.